Okay, I think we will start. Welcome everyone to a webinar. Uh, uh, we're going to try to figure out what's in the American Rescue Plan for children, youth, and families, and how you can access that plan. You have come to the right place if that's where you want to be. Welcome. My name is Margaret Brodkin. I'm the Director of Funding the Next Generation. And let's go on to the next slide, Shane. So you're going to hear from 5 women about what's in the plan. Funding the Next Generation, I started this about 6 years ago after working in San Francisco on local children's issues, a lot to do with where's the money. A lot of innovations in trying to turn San Francisco into a city that is very pro-child and pro-youth. A lot of organizing, a lot of ballot measures, and Funding the Next Generation is helping people put measures on the ballot, on the local ballot, to get money for kids. And if you are interested in that, after this webinar, please contact me and we can talk about what's going on in your community and whether it makes sense to turn to the local ballot in 2022 or 2024 or even beyond. So I am joined as my co-host with Jackie Guerrero, who I forgot to write in this, is with the Advancement Project of California. She's the Associate Director focusing on equity and community investments, the perfect topic for this webinar. She has been with the Advancement Project 5 years. I think that's correct, Jackie?
That's right.
Monitoring, working a lot with local communities around their investments in young people, with a particular focus on the Central Valley. And she, like 3 of our other presenters, has a master's degree in public policy. So 3 of the women you will hear from have master's degrees in public policy. So go on to the next slide, Shane. So then you will hear from Kylie Wheeler, who is a project manager at the Children's Funding Project, which is a partner of Funding the Next Generation, focused also on how to get money into local communities, how to get measures on the ballot with a national perspective. Then we will hear from, after that, we then hear from Jackie again. We will hear from Jen Dietrich, who is the Director of Policy for the Partnership for Children and Youth. And she has been there 9 years. And after coming from working in the state legislature and in Congress. And the Partnership for Children and Youth are the sort of go-to people when it comes to expanded learning opportunities. So we are calling on her to tell us what's in the plan regarding that. And then we will hear from Kim Krukel, who is the lawyer on this team, and appropriately so, is the executive director of the Child Care Law Center. But she got her start with Parent Voices as a parent organizer. So she has been on the Child Care Law Center staff since 2012. And the Child Care Law Center is one of the most unique organizations in the country. They really talk about the legal aspects of child care and the extent to which child care's, too many of its policies are rooted in all kinds of oppression. And the Child Care Law Center writes laws and litigates and trains people. So we're delighted to have Kim with us. So move on to the next slide, Jane. So the agenda for today is, we're going to have a little introduction, which I'm doing now. Then we're going to have an overview of the American Rescue Plan from the Children's Funding Project. That's Kylie. Then we're going to talk about the 3 pieces of money that are the most important for you to know about. One is the education money. Jackie will talk about that. And then Jen will talk about that. Then we will move on to the child care funding, which Kim will talk about. And then we'll talk about the direct financial recovery money that's coming to cities and counties. And Jackie and I will talk about that. So can you move on to the next slide, Shane? So, you know, we want to give you an overview. We want you to sort of come out knowing sort of what the entry points are for various kinds of advocacy, what the timelines are. We want you to know about how to get more information that you need. We're hoping we're going to inspire some effective advocacy and get creative ideas. We're taping it. Yes, we are. And we will send the tape as well as any materials and the PowerPoints to people after the meeting. We will have 10-minute presentations by each of the people, and then we'll have 5 minutes of Q&A, we hope. We're trying to figure out how to manage that well, but Jackie and I and Kylie will be in the chat. So if you have questions that you want to see answered during this, put it in the chat. So I think that because there are a lot of people on, that you should limit the chat, unfortunately, to questions that you have, or if you have examples of advocacy that you've done, please, you can note it in the chat, because I think we need to have a central place where people's sort of examples of proposals they're making and advocacy strategies are happening. And, you know, as I look at the slides, there will be some repetition. We all know that. We will skip over slides that are too repetitive, but it's complicated information. So I'm hoping a little repetition will be okay. Jackie, do you want to say anything else by way of introduction?
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, I just wanted to also just thank everybody for making time this morning, and obviously thank all our guests, you know, who are going to be talking about really important aspects of the American Rescue Plan and the money that is available for youth. I wanted to also just kind of, you know, ground us in the moment as well. You know, it's been a difficult year, as we all know, and while this money is definitely useful and helpful, right? You know, one trend that we've been seeing over the last few months is just how young people have not been centered in thinking about, you know, how to best support them. And really, this is what this conversation is really wanting to make sure that young people are not left out of the money that is available through the cities and counties, that, you know, needs that young people have around mental health. And, you know, job access are not forgotten when it's, you know, thinking about money how the schools are using dollars. So this is just a really important moment for us to be able to center the young people, and also not forget the impact that the pandemic has had on them, and wanting to make sure that, you know, everybody who's here today has the tools needed so that they can go back into their communities, they can go back into their neighborhoods, and make sure that there is funding allocated to support young people, you know, recover and heal from the pandemic. So just wanted to really ground that, because there's been many conversations around these dollars, but today's conversation is really centered on children and youth. So yeah. Thank you, Margaret.
Yes, and just to underscore that, we want to get people into the mix here, and to use this as an organizing opportunity, use it as an opportunity to raise important needs that have potentially been overlooked. And if you do nothing else after this webinar, we want you to go back to your school districts, cities, counties, and demand transparency in what they're doing, and demand a say in this whole process of figuring out where this money goes. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, and we'll move on to Kylie, who is going to give us an overview from a national perspective.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Jackie. So I'm really pleased to be here. Again, my name is Kylie Wheeler, and I am with Children's Funding Project. We are over on the East Coast, and we are a national organization. So I'm going to try and keep my my piece of this fairly quick, because you know, I'm just giving a national overview and some context. But like Margaret and Jackie said, as an organization, as Children's Funding Project, believe it or not, our whole thing is getting funding to children, you know, local, state, federal. And one of the things that we realized at the, as the pandemic really began to set in was that there was a lot of new money coming down to states and communities, and there was a big risk that these dollars would not be leveraged to the best of our ability for children and youth. So you'll see here, we wrote this Cradle to Career Guide to federal relief funding for kids during and beyond COVID-19. This guide is pretty comprehensive, covers programs and services for children 0 to 24, and was recently updated at the beginning of April to include the American Rescue Plan dollars. So I highly encourage you, if you're looking for a national view and a compendium of what's in not just the American Rescue Plan, but also a record of what has already been done. I highly encourage you to read it if you're interested. And Shane, you can go right ahead. So we wanted to ground this discussion in a little bit of from a national context and a national lens. So we know that there is a lot of recovery money coming down the pike from the American Rescue Plan, from the Act in December, from CARES last year. But there's also a lot of movement, as we know, at the federal level. The Biden administration is proposing some really bold policies and reforms that will, if passed, dramatically affect children and families. And here, pulled out his announcement last week about the increase in the capital gains tax. But just yesterday, the administration announced the American Families Plan, which includes paid family and medical leave, safeguards for low and middle income families that ensure that they are spending no more than 7% of their income on childcare monthly, extending the reforms and expansions of the child and dependent care tax credit and the child tax credit from the American Rescue Plan, making those permanent fixtures of our tax policy, and then universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds and 2 free years of community college. Those are just a few of the things that are being proposed as proactive measures at the federal level. We're here today to talk about the reactive measures that the federal government has taken in the past year, but it is important, I think, to consider where those reactive measures actually fit in. So at the state and local level, what we are seeing is states, communities, intermediaries, they are getting a lot of new money, or they know that a lot of new money is coming down, but they didn't have the capacity or the infrastructure to adequately make the most of the old money in a lot of cases. And I am generalizing, but it is something we are hearing from particularly cities, school districts, and states, that they are concerned about their local or state infrastructure to handle these dollars. So that's something that we are keeping an eye out for. And as all of this is happening, we are tracking the more than 50 localities across the country that have established dedicated sources of public revenue for children, these local dedicated funds. And these local dedicated funds have actually ended up really serving as supports for local infrastructure and local emergency response in the past year. So as we think about capacity, identifying the unique opportunities to supplement in capacity. And then finally, I personally am overwhelmed by this amazing opportunity that states and localities have to leverage this new funding. So I'm really pleased to be here and to hear a little bit more from the other speakers about how California might do that and how communities in California might do that. So Shane, next slide, please. Okay, so from the most bird's eye, the highest 30,000 foot view, this is a timeline of the various federal relief packages, and approximately in each of them, how much can be feasibly connected to children and youth. So, you can kind of see from the declaration of the public health emergency all the way through to the American Rescue Plan, taken together, it's nearly 500 billion for kids in some capacity. So as we're talking about the American Rescue Plan, I feel that we also need to take into account the events of the past year and all of the other funding that has come down and what lessons we might learn. So Shane? All right, so zooming in just a tad, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, this just kind of provides an overview of child and youth related funding in that plan. You'll see over here the overarching funding. We do include the coronavirus fiscal recovery dollars. So that's the state and local direct relief that you'll be hearing more about in a bit, as funding for kids, because it is inherently flexible and it can be used to support programs for children and youth. So we want to include it there. And then everything else here, we have the education dollars, we have the childcare dollars, the hard one childcare dollars, and as well as the behavioral health support. So this kind of shows just a very broad overview of what is in the American Rescue Plan itself. And next, Shane, the American Rescue Plan and the funding that's coming to California. And we're going to dig more deeply. My colleagues are going to dig more deeply into each of these buckets of funding. So I won't spend too much time on this slide. This is a good one to come back to as a quick reference. This just shows what is coming to California and who is going to be the initial recipient of the funding, who will be administering it. Some important dates to remember, as well as our current understanding of accountability and transparency safeguards put in place by policy guidance. I will say, particularly for the first 3 columns here, the direct relief, we are awaiting guidance on pretty much all of the particulars for this funding. So I just checked before this webinar, we still don't have the details on the how, the when, and the, how to follow the rules on that funding. So stay tuned. And so we're going to zoom down even further, Shane. All right, so this is a little bit to take in, but I wanted to offer kind of an example, a proto example of what the funding that's coming to California might look like down at the county, city, and school district level. So I took San Bernardino County, the cities within it, and then the San Bernardino City Unified School District as an example. And we are looking at these columns here in magenta, the coronavirus fiscal recovery funds, and the second column here, the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund, or ESSER 3. And so you'll see here, let's start with the coronavirus fiscal recovery. There is 26.1 billion going directly to the state, and 42 billion total in all of the state, including the local recovery funds. The county, San Bernardino County, will be receiving about 423 million in direct funds. So funds coming directly to, I imagine, the Treasury. And then taken together, all of the metropolitan cities in San Bernardino County will be receiving around 314 million. So again, directly. So there is a lot of money on each of these tiers that can be leveraged strategically. And so then if we're thinking about ESSER 3, so this is the education stabilization funds. This is the money everybody's talking about that includes the 20% for learning recovery, after school, summer enrichment, summer learning. So, and I know others are going to get into this more later, so I'm just going to keep it really, really simple. California is receiving about $15 billion as part of ESSER 3. 90% of that is going to local school districts across California. So about 13.6 billion is going to local school districts. By the time we get down to the school district level in San Bernardino, this school district will be receiving about 243 million from the state, and a little under 50 million of that must be used for learning recovery. So, and I mention that only because those dollars are reserved for, almost reserved to be flexible and reserved to attend to the real, some of the heavier fallout of COVID for children and youth. So the social emotional pieces and what have you. So this just kind of gives you a sense of, you know, in your typical county, what you can expect, and you know who will need to be responsible for the strategy. So that is that.
Kylie, so there's a question that came in from the chat from Emily Lee. She asked, what qualifies as learning recovery uses?
So that is a really good question.
Well,
and
you know what I'm going to do, Kylie?
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure everybody gets to present.
Yes.
And a lot of our presentations are going to drill down on the kind of questions you would get after this. So I'm going to there's a question about learning recovery. I'm going to have Jackie and Jen respond to that. And I think let's move on to Jackie and Jen, and then we'll take questions about the education piece. And then at the end, we can have some general questions, and you are free to answer any questions that you know the answer to that someone else might not. So I'm going to turn to Jackie so that's your overview. Now I'm going to turn to Jackie, who's going to talk specifically about the education piece right now after a little bit of a continued overview. Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. And so I will just in anticipation just say, like, today you're going to see a lot of numbers, and so please bear with us. There is obviously a lot of information coming out almost weekly about these dollars, and more than that, a lot of local governments and local jurisdictions, school districts are still learning as well what they can do with these dollars and planning how to spend those dollars. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the conversation that, you know, the next few slides that I'm going to share are related to the funding going to K through 12 schools. And then Jen will follow my presentation to talk a little bit more with, thank you for that. Let me see, hopefully that is better. But then from there, Jen will go into some examples of, you know, what local agencies are doing with these dollars. So I'm only going to focus on the federal dollars that are coming in through what you may continue to hear as ESSER. That stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, right? So ESSER, when you hear that, that's what that fund is, what that, you know, fund is called. This was created specifically during COVID. So it was created during the CARES Act, first federal relief bill. And so in subsequent federal relief bills, both the CARES Act, then the second relief bill in December, and then finally the American Rescue Plan, the federal government has released, you know, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, right? And so again, these dollars were set up to support local schools weather the impacts of the pandemic. And the way that this money is allocated is first, you know, divided through the U.S. Department of Education. Then the U.S. Department of Education, you know, provides those funds to the California Department of Education, who then, again, cuts those dollars down to the local education agencies, the school districts. What the dollar amounts I'm going to show you do not include are the GEAR funds. That is the Governor's Emergency Education Relief. He set up his own additional fund. It's much smaller, but it provided additional dollars to schools. So I do not include GEAR funding. I felt like, try to keep it simple for this conversation because the ESSER funds are the ones that still have quite a bit of money, connected to them, and the rest are just additional. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a really, I try to give you a snapshot of the dollars that are going down to the local education agencies. And so what you see is in the first federal relief bill through ESSER 1, in March of last year in 2020, the CARES Act provided $1.6 billion to school districts here in California. Then in the December federal relief bill in 2020, there was another 6.7 provided, so 6.7 billion provided through ESSER 2. And then finally in March of this year, with the passage of the American Rescue Plan, there was 13.5 billion, or, it's 13.5, I think if I rounded it up, it would be 13.6 through ESSER 3, right? And so what you see here is that in every subsequent federal relief bill, there's just a lot more money going down to school districts. And that's a good thing. And it's also, again, that going back to the thing that Kylie mentioned around a challenge of like, how do they absorb these dollars and how do they make smart investments, smart decisions around how they spend these dollars is going to be the challenge, right? And then also, how do they continue to engage community in making decisions around how to spend them? And that is kind of where we're at. And again, we'll hear about Jen as well to provide you all with an examples of what folks are doing to make sure these dollars go to support students and don't stay in like reserve accounts, say, for the school districts. If we can go to the next slide. So this slide really is just going into the distribution methodology and just one really important piece around the ESSER 3, which is the latest, and largest funding allocation for school districts, is that, one thing to note is that, the states receive this money based off of the same proportion of that they received under Title I. So they use Title I Part A as a way to distribute these dollars. There was a requirement that when the states first got the money from the U.S. Department of Education, that they would allocate 90% to LEAs, right? And that's something we've heard already. And this is a really important thing, that the funds are given are made on a quarterly basis. So instead of giving one lump sum, they're getting them on a quarterly basis, which again, I think for planning purposes allows us to be able to make and influence those decisions around how those dollars are spent. And then, again, the dollars, the main focus was to help schools reopen and help students catch up on learning loss. But this is where the equity component has really come in through the ESSER 3, which is that it required LEAs to spend 20% of their allocation on learning loss for students who were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic to address their academic, social, and emotional needs. So there's 20% of these dollars must be spent, of these ESSER 3 dollars must be spent to support those students. There's no reason why it couldn't be applied to the other two ESSERs, but again, just something to really keep in mind, because for advocacy purposes, you can easily just say, these must be going to these highest need students. So again, just a really important thing to underline as an advocacy point that will help you make your case. If we can go to the next slide, please.
You have a question, Jackie, about charter schools.
Yes. Hold on, let me see. Do any of the subgroup categories? Yeah, I think, special education. So they don't define, and this is where it'd also be helpful to hear from Kylie. My understanding is they do not define the student subgroups.
No, they don't. However, they do include a lot of language around ensuring different types of equity in the way the funds are allocated. So, but no, there aren't any hard and fast divisions of subgroups.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is where, again, there looks like Carla asked, does it include, children living below poverty levels? I would say yes, it would. Those would likely include under that. I think you can make a case, right? If you have data to support the students have been impacted, English learners would probably be another student group that I would also make a case have been impacted by the pandemic and thus deserve to be included in the 20% allocation. So then let me just walk you all through the distribution timeline. And so we got this information from the department Tony Thurman, the state superintendent's office. And I'll drop the link in because his office also provided a cheat sheet for how these dollars are being spent and how they're being allocated. So the ESSER $1, the one thing to really know about these, and these are the CARES Act fund dollars, they have a deadline. They need to be spent down by September 30th, 2022. So that's next year. One thing we heard from his office is that these funds have mostly been expended, over 50%, but it also means that there's still money there coming in through ESSER 1. Then ESSER 2 is, the deadline to spend those dollars down are September 30th, 2023. And the first quarterly allocations of these dollars are actually just coming down next month. In May and June, right? So they still haven't even been felt by the school districts. And then ESSER 3, the deadline to spend those down are September 30th to 2023. So again, giving schools more time to be able to spend those down. And those dollars have still not yet hit local coffers, right? The school district coffers. So for advocacy timing, this is a good time to already be engaging and again, mobilizing, working with community groups, working with youth to start identifying, what additional expenditures young people need that are currently not being funded. So again, just really wanted to point this timeline out. And then the resource for where you can find this information is, I'm dropping it in the link, which again sends you to the state superintendent's cheat sheet. If we can go to the next slide, please. And so, there's just two really important things to know about, ESSER 3 is that there is a maintenance of effort requirement and maintenance of equity. The maintenance of effort really is the state has agreed to maintain their levels of funding for K through 12 education. So, through LCFF and whatnot for fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 in order to be able to qualify for these funds. So they can't be reducing, the levels of funding for schools. The other thing too is that they also must agree, to not make any financial cuts to school districts with high numbers of low-income students. So this means that LEA's, local education agencies must not also be making cuts to their high need schools. So no staffing reductions. And at least in some of the places we've been, we have not necessarily seen that to be the case. And we know, at least here in California, that the state is obviously pouring additional money into the school systems. But just something to keep in mind and keep an eye on if you're hearing your local school agency talking about making cuts to certain schools. That shouldn't necessarily be the case because they're getting a lot more money from these funds to be able to cover any shortfalls or any additional costs. If we can go, so now what I want to do is provide you all with a snapshot of what this would look like. So in the Los Angeles Unified School District, through CARES Act last year, and I also included in this total some of the governor's GEAR funding, the district received $845 million. Then in December, through the December second federal relief bill, they received another $1.2 billion. And then finally, through the rescue plan in this year in March, they received $2.6 billion. 534 of those dollars are again allocated or should be set aside for equity for those high need students. But what you could see is that in 1 year, LAUSD got $4.7 billion in additional funding through ESSER, right? That's a lot of money when you look at when you know that the total budget of LAUSD is it's 8.8 billion, something around that amount, right? So over half of their money, they got 50% of additional funding from the government to help them, again, weather the impact of the pandemic, help support their students recover from learning loss. But that's a lot of money. And the other thing too is that not all of it has been spent. Because if we go to earlier slides, we know that some of the money is just starting to come through. So just really important for advocacy purpose to keep that in mind. If we can go to the next slide. So some, again, just key things to keep in mind is that, always really good to keep a lookout the fiscal, outlook of the agencies. There may, some of these, what we're seeing, and this can also apply for, some of the local government work as well, is that some of these dollars, may want to be used for pet projects or for non-equity aligned spending. So, really paying attention to, what the LEAs are saying, school districts are saying, and how they want to spend these dollars. There's also, again, the need for community groups to align priorities and lead on united front. If there are other, children and youth groups in your community, connecting and working with them to develop and ask and really kind of bring that to the board is really important. Use data and really community surveys, student surveys will help support your campaign. And then again, some districts are saying, we don't want to hire staff with these dollars. That is a cost that will be ongoing after these dollars have been spent down. You can, actually make a case for, at least talking about this as seed funding, right? Talking about this as pilot programming, wanted to work with them to find long-term sustainable funding for these projects and programs, so that, once the dollars have been expended, you can still find a way to maintain those services that young people have come to rely on. So those are just some key insights and recommendations. And from here, I'll definitely pass it to Jen, who'll talk more about the local examples in her work as well.
Thanks, Jackie. This is Jen Dietrich with the Partnership for Children and Youth. We also house and coordinate the California After School Advocacy Alliance, CA3. And happy to see some of those members on today. If you can go to the next slide, we've been organizing advocacy around funding coming down from the American Rescue Plan. We're talking about the state level set-asides that are specifically designated for comprehensive and evidence-based after school, summer learning and enrichment programs, and learning loss recovery interventions. And we're also on the other side trying to help prepare providers and stakeholders to advocate locally for the funding in that red circle, that 20% that local education agencies must spend on evidence-based learning loss recovery interventions. And going to the next slide. In our outreach to decision makers at the state and local levels, we've recognized some common themes and we have some recommendations on advocacy. Going to the next slide. We've been trying to organize the chaos of information. Decision makers are overwhelmed right now. They're trying to meet urgent needs and sorting through challenges, using resources as, resources has been a top barrier in the past, but now we have an infusion of funds, but it's still hard to figure out what funding can be used for what's the timing of that, all of that. So we've tried to organize some, like a funding chart like this on the federal resources. There are also other federal resources that can be used for expanded learning programs. If you go to the next slide, we're also thinking about the state funding that is also available and should be coordinated with federal funding. And again, decision makers are still learning the details about all of this right now. Going to the next slide. And just want to pause for a moment and say, there's so much going on right now, and you've all done so much over the last year, and there's a lot of work ahead of us. And the pandemic has really helped put a spotlight on the challenges and our needs in our communities, but the spotlight also has also been on your essential work. Everything that you've done to support students and families and school communities during the pandemic is exactly what's going to be needed for years to come in recovery. So we're really encouraging you to use this opportunity to let decision makers know what you need to meet student needs in your community. So going to the next slide, we really encourage you, like Jackie said, to highlight data and stories from your community. Decision makers need to be reminded, how have you been serving students and families throughout the pandemic with school closures? How are you supporting them with their physical, social, emotional, and academic needs? And again, talking about those student groups who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Share who are you serving? Who would you like to serve if you had more money? And we've seen people, collect stories, photos, their videos. They don't have to be high quality. They can just be Zoom conversations or social media posts from families or students about what they need. And to remind decision makers that, schools can't fix this on their own, where we've, especially with staffing and one-time funding challenges, community partners are here, have been, and will continue to be an essential partner. So going to the next slide, these are some of the conversations we've been having with folks about how to best leverage these resources, and understanding that, these solutions need to have some evidence base for helping with learning loss recovery, in addition to supporting expanded learning programs who are currently doing this work, who need more money to improve service and expand access. These are also some really creative ways that people are taking the opportunity to blend funding, staffing, and locations, talking about activities that will help re-engage and rebuild relationships with students and families, and address their social and emotional needs to prepare them to re-engage at school and accelerate learning. Like, there's a lot that needs to go there before we just get to tutoring or remediation or that sort of thing. So really talking about some creative uses of funding for high school students, whether it's teaching or mentoring programs for younger students. A lot of folks are talking about big summer programs that could possibly be district-wide to help prepare students, make them feel comfortable and their families with coming back to campus, and prepare them for the next school year. Field trips is on here because, there's students have had a dramatic year. What are ways that we can encourage them and engage them and make them want to come to additional programming during the summer or after school. We don't want to just keep offering more of the same. Going to the next slide. We're really encouraging folks to build on the relationships that you have and find messengers. So start wherever you are. If you have an assistant principal or a counselor or a PTA member, ask them, let them know about what's going on, what you're doing, what is needed, and ask them to connect you with the next level up. And as Jackie said, some communities are banding together, are coming together to propose big ideas to the school district, and others are approaching school districts and having a one-on-one conversation about, what are your needs? What are your priorities? How can we help you do that? Going to the next slide. As it's been put in the chat and on here, please, before you reach out, you can look up what your school district is estimated to receive, at least out of the American Rescue Plan. There's also links to evidence-based research to support the evidence-based strategies that we're suggesting through this site. Also want to highlight that local education agencies, they have to seek community input and develop a plan for the use of funds within 30 days of receipt of funding. Again, talking about accountability and transparency, but we got a quick turnaround. Going to the next slide, and my last slide is just to remind you all that you are an expert, you are an advocate. The story of your programs, your students, your families, your workforce, these are the stories that matter right now. And it's our responsibility to educate and inform decision makers about how to best leverage these resources and meet the needs. And we really need to do that quickly. So I'm good with my presentation, and I'll hand it over to Kim to focus on the childcare funding, and hope to have more time for.
Wait 1 minute.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, there you are. Everybody can be contacted after this. We may do part 2. I do want to point out that the 20% we keep talking about that can be spent on these broader things, it's at least 20%. Part of the 80% can be spent on emotional and social learning, on all kinds of things also. So I know and you better believe your school district knows exactly how much money they're getting, and they are already planning for it. So demand for transparency, get in there. San Francisco, I just learned, has already planned what it's going to do with its 20%. They're going to run a traditional summer school for 2 summers. So nobody knows that. There's been no public discussion of that. But so that's an example of something that's going on and why people need to get involved in this. So now we're going to turn to Kim, and I'm trying to get people to do questions in the chat. We'll take them as we go, but I'm very concerned about, time and making sure we get through, we cover everything. So Kim,
Okay.
your turn.
All right. I think I'll be as quick as I can. Good morning, everybody. And it's an honor to be with so many passionate advocates. Shane, I'm using my own slides. So I assume you have my first slide up there, which is the one that says at the top, quick context, the state of childcare.
Yes.
So, great. So as you all know, even before the pandemic, childcare was way too expensive. And for many people, it was impossible to find. It was even more unsustainable that childcare providers are paid just abominably low wages in general. And yet I'm sure you all know how much on the front lines childcare professionals are. They are there to care for kids, even when everyone else is closed. They're there to identify children with developmental needs and abilities. They're there to help with distance learning. So they really are the ultimate in frontline responders. Unfortunately, we did lose about nearly 300,000 licensed spaces for children temporarily, and permanently about 33,000 spaces across the state of California. Luckily, we're going to talk a little bit about how the funding is going to help hopefully mitigate that. Next slide, please, Shane. Thank you. So here is a childcare provider with our great and own Kamala Harris, announcing $39 billion released on April 15th to the states to help childcare programs and families recover from the pandemic. I want to point out that this is a really big deal. $39 billion. We have never, ever seen that kind of investment in childcare and early childhood learning since like World War II, which none of us, I don't think, was even alive for. So this is a really exciting moment for people who are passionate about supporting families and childcare providers and little kids. I also want to give a nod to the fact that the reason that so many advocates, passionate advocates, were clamoring for this money right from the get-go of the pandemic, right away, did some studies and offered up estimates of what it would really take to help childcare recover from the pandemic, to keep the childcare programs going, to help the families pay for childcare. So what did we get? Number one, just raise your hand if you've heard of the Child Care and Development Block Grant. Okay, I cannot see everybody. I can just see a few people, but yes, I see lots of hands. That's great. As most of you know, the Child Care and Development Block Grant has been going on since 1990. And this fund goes to help families pay for childcare, and it also goes to help pay for quality improvements across of our state. Until this year, Child Care and Development Block Grant funds were administered by the California Department of Education. The funds are being transferred now as a result of last year's Budget Act over to administration under the Department of Social Services. The other half of the new money in the American, well, it's actually 2/3 in the American Rescue Plan, is a new kind of program that we have never had before called the Child Care Stabilization Grants. Next slide, please, Shane. And I am trying to watch my clock here to make sure I don't go over my time. Okay, so we have overall $15 billion in CCDBG money. These funds will, as I said, they can be used to help families pay for childcare. What's unique about these funds is the income ceilings do not apply. So families who are in various lines of essential work can still be eligible and receive these grants. Also, some of the requirements in the traditional CCDBG money about quality set-asides and other restrictions on expenditures by the state do not apply. Next slide, please. Okay, the child care stabilization grants are going to be particularly important this year because they're a new kind of funding for California. What is interesting about this fund is that it does create a path for privately funded childcare programs as well as publicly funded childcare programs to get grants for their programs. And we have, many of you have probably heard stories about childcare providers who are trying to adapt their outdoor backyards for outdoor play, ongoing outdoor care, but then also trying to adapt their indoors because of the fire season, how they are trying to operate at the same level of staffing, but with fewer children. Conversely, you may have heard how difficult it has been for childcare programs to keep staff when people have fears of health concerns, as well as unemployment and other issues related to the pandemic. These grants can help mitigate all of these circumstances. They can be used for pretty much anything to help childcare providers recover from the pandemic. And both the child care stabilization grants and the CCDBG funds specifically are to be used. This is key for lawyers, the lawyers in the room, to supplement, not supplant state funding. So all of these funds are supposed to be on top of what the state already would spend. Just one more point about this child care stabilization grants before we go to the next slide. Is that it is really, really a great opportunity for you all, especially I've seen a couple of comments in the chats about certain groups of people like Hmong people or children with disabilities. It is very, very important to have these grant programs be operated, all of the ones that we're talking about today, to be talked about and operated in simple language in a multitude of languages without a lot of reporting or reporting requirements or really onerous participation requirements, so that all of our community members really have the opportunity to participate in how these dollars get spent and how they get out the door. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're on to the part about how you all can engage and how this is going to be decided in California. So unlike all the other dollars that we've been talking about this morning, the CCDBG and Child Care Stabilization grants will come to one lead agency in the California state, and that'll be temporarily, I think, the Department of Education. And then they are all lumped together in our state budget process. So I am going to not go through the wave of your hands again, but I'm going to assume that all of you know that our state budget process is the major way each year that childcare policy is decided in California, and also that it is a piece of legislation, just like any other legislation, that everybody has the opportunity to weigh in on. The Child Care Law Center, along with probably several other people on this call today, hopefully many, is a member of the California Ece Coalition. This is a group of about 40 plus, maybe even more organizations that agree to combine and coordinate our efforts on one focused budget ask each year. With all of the new federal dollars coming in, the Ece Coalition has created, based on considerations of equity and voices from the field, parents and childcare providers, as well as a broad swath of organizations advocating for children, come up with a set of recommendations that they have asked the state legislature to consider. Just as a reminder, the governor offers his budget next week after the May revise. The legislature, both the Assembly and the Senate side, offer up different ones, and the three of them have to agree. So the gist of the asks this year are to expand childcare assistance drastically, to eliminate the fees that parents pay for publicly funded childcare, and to distribute these grants that we were talking about a minute ago to both private pay and publicly funded childcare programs. And the last slide, Shane. Opportunities to engage. I think there are many seasoned advocates on this call, so I won't go over this in detail because people have already said this, but I do just want to re-emphasize the importance. When you're advocating, speak in your own native language, bring people of varying abilities, insist that these programs be equitably distributed and can take into the account the brilliant people, populations, language, cultures, and abilities
Kim,
that we have in our state. Yes.
Kim, most of what we're talking about, people will be advocating at the local level. Are you
Okay.
talking about advocating at the state level? And there are questions about, okay, I run a childcare center. How do I access this? Is my county going to be in charge of it? Or will I apply for a state grant? How will this work?
Great. Okay. The state legislature still has to decide to allocate this grant program the way I just described it to you. So we actually do not even know yet whether or not the state will agree to distribute the funding in the way that I have described. And I'm going to ask my colleague, Catherine White, just to unmute if we have to do anything else. But right now, all I can say is that you need to let your local legislators know that you heard about this program at this webinar today, and that you are hoping that they will enact it this way.
But it will likely be a grant program from the state, as opposed to passing it on to the counties or school districts or some local agency, right?
I highly doubt it will get passed on to either counties, local school districts, or the state. Yes. Does anybody else have a better answer than that?
I would just say our current sense, based on the guidance, the small amount of guidance that's been released so far, is that at least for the stabilization dollars, it will be the state's responsibility. And I believe they are compelled to set up a grant program of some sort, but that's just for the stabilization dollars.
Right.
So yeah.
Yes. Okay,
as for the
thank you.
supplemental CCDBG, I don't think.
Yes, right.
And
right.
Shane, show her last slide, which has, I think, ultimately some links to important information, which I don't think you can link from here, but we're sending out the PowerPoints to everyone, so you'll be able to link to these fact sheets and information.
Right. So through Margaret and through all of us, we at the Child Care Law Center will do everything humanly possible to let you know when and how you can either advocate or access these grant programs. For sure. And thank you very much.
Okay, that was great. And now we're going to, next slide, Shane, we're going to move on to Jackie, and we're going to talk about the next pot of money. And in some ways, the biggest for people who will be advocating from the local level.
Yeah.
So Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. And let me put this close to my mouth.
Yeah.
So the next conversation we're going to have is just the money going down and really more focused on the local aid funding, not so much at the state level. So just a quick snapshot as part of the American Rescue Plan. This latest relief bill included $350 billion in emergency aid for state, local, tribal, and U.S. territories. So that's a lot more than what was provided through CARES. CARES funding last year in March provided $150 billion. So this is, more than double that amount. So that's a good thing. And in this iteration, actual smaller, local government agencies like cities actually got their own allocation. They didn't have to rely on counties to be able to provide them with a share of the money that counties got. So just a snapshot, the state government, so like states like California and Washington, D.C. got their own allocation. It was around $195.3 billion. Local government agencies, counties, cities got $130.2 billion, and then tribal governments and U.S. territories got $24.5 billion. Again, lots of money there and available to be able to cover a lot of the costs related to COVID, but honestly, the eligible uses were expanded in this latest iteration of the federal relief bill. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the allowable uses and methodology, on the allowable uses side, the rescue plan allows governments to use these dollars to respond to and mitigate the public health emergency and or its negative economic impacts. So what that means is that if they suffered any, revenue decreases because of the pandemic, you may see some local government, some agencies want to use those dollars to plug holes in their budget. Some, governments are doing better than others. So again, that earlier recommendation around just even having an understanding of what that deficit could look like, just reading reports that, cities often put out will be good just to help your advocacy. Allowable, the funds would, be allowed to be expended over multiple years into 2024. So that's another big change. Last year's CARES Act, gave, local governments less than a year. They had to spend the dollars down by December. And then in the December federal relief bill, they extended that deadline into this year. But of course, by then, a lot of the money had been spent, or they were rushing to get dollars out the door. And it didn't allow for more strategic thinking about best uses of these dollars. So, that's the American Rescue Plan changed that, and it is giving, local governments more time to spend those dollars down. So that's a good thing because it gives folks, again, more time to think strategically. Then the allocation methodology, basically they use the community development block grant allocation methodology, which takes into account population size, rates of poverty, housing, as a way to figure out, how much each government agency would be receiving. So that's just something really good to keep in mind. Some folks have said, can we look at the community development block grant formula to make a case for spending these dollars equitably within local government, so that way, they're not, again, spent to backfill, only spent to backfill losses or give increases to certain departments, but, think about, giving money for rental assistance or, even universal basic income, right? Things like that to get those dollars out into communities. We're actually already seeing in some instances local governments wanting to divide these dollars equally across districts in their community. And one thing is we know sometimes the need isn't equally divided amongst districts, so spending dollars that way is it's a political feasible thing, but it's not an equitable way to distribute funds based off of need. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a timeline for dispersal. The legislation was signed in March. By May, the way that the money is actually being doled out is that the first half of aid will be available next month, just a few days. And then the second half that the local agency will be receiving will be coming down 12 months from now, so next year in May. So, they're still getting the full amount, but it's coming in 2 chunks. And, this is coming a month before a typical budget adoption is the typical budget adoption. So, a lot of local government agencies are in the middle of pulling together their budgets. In some cases, they may be accounting for these funds in those budgets. And so we do hope to see some transparency, at least initial plans around how to spend it. In other instances, they may actually just set these dollars aside and have an internal process for how to allocate them. And so again, this is really important around advocacy, is really pushing your mayors, supervisor, board of supervisors to make sure that they're bringing transparency to this process, that they're engaging in community, and it's not done through an insular process where only department heads and city managers or CEOs, county CEOs are deciding how these dollars go out. If we can go to the next slide. So this is a snapshot in terms of what is coming down to the state, and then how much the total is 42.3 billion, but the way that is divided is the state is getting about 62% of the total amount coming to California. Counties are getting 7.7 billion. Metro cities, so pretty large cities, are getting 7 billion, and then other non-counties, really like smaller agencies or local governments, are getting 1.3 billion. And I know Margaret has a link to where you can find out what your local government is getting. I think Margaret also has some snapshots, but there's just more, cities and counties, or cities, getting it. So in that link that she'll provide, you can actually find yours and find out how much is coming down. If we can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to provide some examples of what some organizations, nonprofits are doing to use these dollars that are coming to cities and counties for children and youth. Some examples are child care relief funds, so setting aside funding for providers who were hurt due to the pandemic. A lot of these can even really kind of fall under the umbrella of supporting small businesses because they are still businesses, and so, but you can create a separate fund specifically for that. We've seen other cases of, these dollars to bridge the digital divide. So cities and counties may be setting aside money to provide technology, internet, and other services for families to access the internet. Then you may see actual grants for children and youth program providers. So this could be for, community organizing groups who are doing youth programming. They could be receiving some of these dollars. And then in other cases, we've seen individual income assistance. So, direct money to individuals, families to cover food, mortgage, utilities, other kind of expenses. So these are just some examples. There really are very few barriers for how these dollars can be used. So, you can, do what some other folks have done, or be very creative in how you want to get these dollars out. I think, so I'll actually, I kind of already talked about some of these, so I'll pass it over to Margaret, who I know will give more examples as well in a second. If we can go to the next slide, please. Next one. Thank you.
Okay, just to follow up on what Jackie has said. And by the way, I have some of these links on the homepage of fundingthenextgeneration.org. So if you want to find out exactly, the National League of Cities will tell you exactly how much your cities, the cities in your county are getting, how much the county is getting, and it's very helpful to know. So for instance, here are examples of how much like San Joaquin County is getting and the city of Stockton. You can see the examples. It's in the scheme of things, is this a huge amount of money given where we've come from and people's visions of what they want to do? This feels like a lot of money. And I just summarized the deadlines of when the money has to be dispersed, B-U-R-S-T, but that did not get corrected. So move on to the next slide. So here again, just to repeat what Jackie has done, and you'll get this slide. On the left side is the language in the measure. On the right side are ideas about what can be funded. I really want to encourage my youth organizing friends to go for this money and look at youth internships and civic engagement and the kind of things that your county could fund to get young people back, you know, involved in their community, and what could be a better way than to use this money. But you can get cash assistance. In San Francisco, the priority at a hearing was for housing for transitional youth. You can also get childcare funded, even though it's going to come from the state. You can do behavioral health supports. The second category is about premium pay for essential workers. And we got to think that's childcare, youth workers, teachers, community outreach workers. You can put that, fight to get that in the plan. And as Jackie said, there, the money is to sustain things that have either had to be cut or will have to be cut. And so that's a lot of local agencies, but including nonprofit agencies and agencies that have contracts with government. There's also a potential use for infrastructure. We can fight about social infrastructure. We can talk about transportation, internet technology for kids. So this is, we want you to think creatively and think about possible ways, and don't limit yourself in going to your city and county governments. Next slide. So I want to just give you an example of these guys in Sonoma County. They are fabulous. They had almost no time to put this together. They submitted like a 4-page letter to their board of supervisors with a couple of charts. This is like the top of the letter. You can see they put together, they have all the you know, all the logos of all the people who have signed on to this letter. Sonoma County is 500,000 people, so that's a lot of, that makes a big impression. And they have this little gimmick going. It was done by the first 5, saying the first 5 million of Sonoma County's money should go to the first 5 years. And then show the next slide. They spelled out in their letter, I want people to look at this, what these 5 categories of funding mean, how much it should be, what the funding mechanism should be. Because my experience with county and city government is we have to make it easy for them. If you have ideas about how money can be who can allocate it, how it can be allocated, you're helping your county. So this is what the early care and education people put together to appeal to their county. And it has to do with addressing the mental health issues that have arisen as a result of this pandemic. It has helping people navigate all the safety net services they need, home visiting, direct stipends to childcare workers, and stabilizing money that has been reduced or cut throughout the pandemic. So show the next slide. The next thing they did I thought was very interesting for those of you who are thinking county. They went to their county and are going to every city in the county. And they're saying, this is how much the county should put in. This is how much the cities should put in. I thought that was a very interesting and important strategy. It's something that people can consider. Go on to the next slide. So my advocacy tips, and Jackie can chime in, and other people who have been speakers can chime in. As I said at the beginning, the first thing I always say, which I didn't put on this list, is, you know, you've got to demand transparency. For instance, well, you know, our county's already deciding how to spend the money. So if you haven't started, it's it's not too late, but one needs to get started. Every city and county will be very different. San Francisco, for instance, which is dependent on a tourist economy, is actually going to use almost all its money to fill gaps in services and programs that, you know, are already exist to avoid cuts. So our our capacity to do new and exciting things is limited, but many counties are not dependent, are doing quite well. And so you want to find out how your county or city is doing. You want to see what the things you think are important, how that fits into other competing needs. I love what Sonoma did. They work in coalition. They immediately developed a strong coalition, as other people have done around the state. They found a champion on their board of supervisors and on various city councils. And they, like a number of places around the state, conducted a survey. Some have done it of providers, some have done it of youth, some have done it of families to quickly get data. I love this because this kind of work can provide the groundwork for people who are interested in ballot measures down the road. I gave some advice about what the proposals should look like. I always recommend be specific how much money is needed, always relate it to the conditions created by the pandemic, suggest ways that can be leveraged after this limited money is available. I think it's wise to have ideas about an allocation mechanism, make it easy for them. People are going and acting like, well, this is a new money, I want to submit a proposal. Basically, you're not submitting a proposal, you're offering support. So framing whatever you take to your city council or board of supervisors is, here is how we can support the issues that the county is now addressing. And I like the idea of including both your county and your cities. There was good luck in San Diego with this, where they got their county to put in money, but they made it contingent on cities putting in money. And I thought that was a very clever strategy. So go on to the next slide. So this is how you can get in touch with people who have been on this panel. And I saved 10 minutes to allow some of our panelists to answer any questions that have come up or add their 2 cents to any issues that they think have been overlooked. So I think maybe I will turn to everyone to just make any concluding remarks in the next 10 minutes. So if you have something quick to add, that would be great. So Kylie, shall we start with you?
Sure. So I guess the first thing I want to say is I think it's incredible how much was covered today. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of money. So yeah, just thank you to my colleagues for covering all of this. I just would encourage, I know some questions came up at the beginning about, what the American Rescue Plan's ESSER dollars can be used for, some questions about special education, transitional kindergarten. And I would just encourage, all of you to think of those dollars, assume that you can do a thing with those dollars, because they really are not the guardrails are pretty wide. So Margaret, kind of like you were saying, you know, you are not making a proposal, you are providing support. So I've heard other people say, act as though you are writing yourself a grant.
Right.
So with these dollars.
I do want to say, I want to collect the proposals, letters, strategies people are using. I've put 2 or 3 on the homepage of our website now, but send me, if you send a letter, send it to me, because people learn from seeing other examples. Jackie, do you have things you want to add?
Yeah, I do. And I echo what Kylie said as well. You know, I think for the city and county side, you know, there's a bit of a mad dash, right, to get these dollars. And I
Put
think
your
that,
microphone closer.
thank you. I know there was a mad dash. There was a mad dash to get these dollars. And I think the things that will make your organizing and your work successful is if you really thought out, right, the implementation piece, that you are, you know, have the data to support the calls you're making. Because, you know, a lot of, you know, if you're a city manager, if you're a CEO, you're getting requests from everywhere. You're getting them from the departments, you're getting them for other community groups. So being engaged and really having a thorough, thoughtful recommendation process, it's like what Kylie said, right? You're writing a grant, is really going to help your case. And then at the end of the day, organizing, right? Bringing young people, bringing the community, really, you know, pushing, you know, rallies as safely as possible. I know folks are still holding rallies because that's unfortunately the only way, you know, that they get attention because of the pandemic. A lot of, you know, council meetings, supervisor meetings is still held virtually, and it's just not the same anymore. You know, making public comment or submitting a letter, it just doesn't hold the same weight. And so, you know, really working with communities, making noise, having that proposal ready, I think will be bring you more success in that way. Because what I'm seeing right now is that's how people are being able to move forward, is if they can show that base, really standing behind those calls for investments. And I would say the same goes in the school district side. You know, they've actually gotten so much more money, and you know, and they're making decisions already, like Margaret has identified, right? So the only way we can actually reverse that is if the community gets loud. So just wanted to underline that piece.
Great. I just wrote a note about using the media, adding that to Jackie's list, that and a rally is also a media event. Kim, you want to add anything new?
I think in addition to everybody else's great comments, I would just add that we are on the brink of a new reality, and we need to keep that forefront in our messaging. I just heard on the radio this morning that 0.3% of our wealthiest Americans are going to pay for the entire new universal pre-K and paid leave and childcare programs that Biden is proposing. I mean, once we finally have an equitable tax system, our whole reality could be different. And just keeping that in mind as we move forward.
And if you know Joe Manchin, put the screws to him, right?
Yeah.
So Jen, you want to add anything?
The only thing I'll add at this point is just to support your call for sharing what people are proposing and hearing. We're hearing that a lot of folks, whether it's at the state or local level, are looking for other examples. And if so-and-so district can do it, we can do it too, or, you know, so in cities. So there's a little bit of friendly competition among decision makers, but we should use this as an opportunity to share you know, collective ideas on this.
I am amazed how insulated people are in this fight, and they don't know what's going on in other places. So to the extent we can share that, I think that would be enormously helpful. It's part of why First Five got ahead of the game, because they have a statewide organizational structure and settled on this 5% for the first 5 years of life. And so they are out the door with their stuff. Other people are too, who are already sort of good organizers. But please send us information. Anybody else who is on the panel want to make any further comments? I hope this was useful. And I know somebody made a comment, great webinar, thank you very much. And I want to thank all my fellow women, lady presenters. And thank you so much for participating. And yes, I would like the presenters to all send me whatever materials they want people to get, because I am holding the list of everyone who was here. So if there are fact sheets and stuff we should be sending out to people, I will be doing that. I'll also be posting it on our website. So thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.
Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks so much, Margaret. This was wonderful.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you, Margaret, for putting it all together. I think people really liked it.
oh, I am just